They never saw her coming, until the woman they ignored and maltreated became the most powerful person in the room. Before we dive in, kindly let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel so you never miss an episode like this one. The office buzzed with the usual clatter of keyboards, ringing phones, and caffeine-fueled chatter. No one looked twice when Clara slipped in through the side entrance, pushing her cleaning cart like she had every morning for the past decade. Her forest green uniform hung neatly on her frame, her expression composed, unreadable, like a mask she wore daily. To the executives, she didn't exist. Just the janitor. The one who tidied their offices, emptied their trash bins, and occasionally received a faint nod if she was lucky. That was life at Whitmore Chase, one of Atlanta's most polished and powerful firms. Clara, now in her mid-50s, had blended into the background so well she might as well have been wallpaper. She was used to it. The offhand comments they thought she couldn't hear. The way conversations lowered or turned smug when she entered a room. Just last week, she'd stood silently outside a glass-walled meeting, waiting for the suits to wrap up so she could do her job, only to hear one of them mutter, "She's not even cleaning anything, just standing there." Clara didn't flinch. She never did. She kept her eyes low and her hands busy. She'd long ago learned the power of stillness, of not giving people what they expected. What no one in that office realized, what not one of them had ever bothered to see, was that Clara held a secret. A dangerous, precise, and game-changing secret. The kind of truth that could bring the whole tower crashing down. But Clara wasn't careless. She didn't move in anger. She moved in silence. She studied. She waited. Today something was different. As she rolled her cart through the gleaming hallways of Whitmore Chase, her calm exterior hid the growing storm inside her. The quiet kind of pressure that builds over time. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it erupts. And that morning, like clockwork, the day unfolded. But Clara wasn't here to play her usual part. Clara wiped down the glass doors until they sparkled, ran the vacuum across the thick lobby carpet, and straightened up desks buried under paperwork, left behind by people who never thought twice about the mess. She moved with quiet focus, tuning out the usual chatter about mergers, bonuses, and titles being tossed around like confetti. But then, one conversation snagged her attention. She didn't mean to listen, wasn't the type to snoop, but the voices were too loud to ignore. "Shareholders' meetings next week," one man said, his tone smug, practically dripping arrogance. "Nothing to stress about. The board's thrilled with the numbers. And the CEO? He's untouchable. No one's got the guts to go after him." Clara's hands stilled on her cart. Her grip tightened. They were so sure of themselves. So blind. But she didn't dwell. Not yet. She had work to finish and the timing had to be right. Whitmore Chase liked to brag about its clean, modern aesthetic. Their Atlanta headquarters, a giant glass monument, regularly showed up in business magazines as a shining example of success. But behind the polished image, the truth was cold. The higher you rose, the more you forgot the people who held up the base. The ones like Clara, silent, invisible, and far more aware than they realized. For nearly 10 years, Clara had walked those halls, quiet and unseen, but always watching. She noticed who got promoted, not the hardworking or the capable, but the ones who talked loud and played the game well. She noticed the hush-hush meetings behind closed doors, the way blame was shuffled downward like a dirty secret no one wanted to claim. Then there was the CEO, Victor Langston. A man who wore power like a tailored suit, sharp at the edges and impossible to ignore. Victor didn't lead with inspiration, he ruled with volume and intimidation. In meetings, his voice cut through the room like a blade, slicing off conversations mid-sentence, making even the confident shrink back. To Victor, results were everything. People were just moving parts, interchangeable, disposable. Clara remembered the time he muttered, not so quietly, about one of the older receptionists. "She's still around?" he scoffed. "Why haven't we phased her out yet? Doesn't exactly scream value." That comment stuck with Clara. Not because it was shocking, but because it wasn't. It was exactly the kind of thing men like Victor said without flinching. It wasn't just the offhand insults, it ran deeper than that. The whole place was soaked in a quiet kind of corruption, the kind nobody dared name out loud. Bonuses for the lowest paid staff vanished without explanation, even as the top brass popped champagne over record-breaking profits. Clara had heard the whispers, padded expense accounts, backroom client deals, and the silent removal of an employee who dared speak out. For the cleaning crew, Clara included, it was a daily grind through disrespect. She'd seen coworkers break down in storage closets after being berated for missing a fingerprint on a glass door. She watched the work double while their pay stayed frozen in place. And then there was the everyday erasure, the way people wouldn't look them in the eye, talked at them like they were slow, or worse, ignored them completely like they were just part of the scenery. There was one moment Clara couldn't shake. A young intern had fumbled a coffee cup, sending the contents splashing across the marble floor outside Victor's office. He froze, panic written all over his face just as Victor turned the corner. "Unbelievable," Victor snapped, his glare swinging to Clara, who happened to be nearby with her mop and bucket. "Get this cleaned up," he barked like she dropped it herself. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't need to defend herself. The intern mumbled apologies, voice shaking, but Victor waved him off like he was swatting a fly. In Victor's world, people like Clara or that intern barely registered. They weren't people. They were just scenery. And those little moments? They didn't disappear. They built up. One by one, like bricks in a wall she carried on her back. Clara's calm had always been her armor, but even steel gets tired. She felt every slight. Every time she was dismissed. Overlooked. But Clara didn't break. She stored each moment like flint, quietly waiting for the spark. Her silence might have blended into the background, but it carried weight. Clara was always there, eyes open, ears sharp, gathering more than dust as she moved through those halls. And the more she observed, the clearer it became. This company's shine was polished with the sweat and dignity of people it refused to see. But Clara wasn't idle. She wasn't just watching, she was building a plan. Slowly, quietly. And soon it would all begin to shift. For years she'd kept her truth hidden. Not because she was scared, but because timing mattered. Because when she moved, it had to count. Clara wasn't just the woman pushing a mop. She was Whitmore and Chase's largest shareholder. A fact no one in that office could have guessed. The title had passed to her after the sudden death of her husband, George. A soft-spoken man who believed in the company when no one else did. He bought shares when they were worth almost nothing. And by the time he passed, those shares gave Clara quiet power. The kind that doesn't need a corner office to command the room. At first, Clara didn't know what to make of the power she'd inherited. She wasn't a businesswoman. She didn't speak the language of boardrooms or be Victor's sheets. She was just Clara, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had weathered life one careful step at a time. Her comfort had always come from knowing her place, sticking to routine and keeping her head down. But the more she swept those floors and emptied those bins, the more she realized invisibility was her advantage. While they looked past her, she was taking notes. While they talked freely, she listened. She learned more about the company than any spreadsheet could show, and more about the people steering it than they'd ever confess in a meeting. The breaking point came on an ordinary evening. She'd just finished tidying the executive lounge, the smell of expensive liquor still hanging in the air, when laughter pulled her attention toward the glass doors. Two senior managers, drinks in hand, were swapping jokes about upcoming layoffs. "Some of these folks act like their jobs mean something," one chuckled. "Yeah," the other replied. "They don't get it, we can replace them all tomorrow." Clara didn't move. She didn't speak. But something in her chest shifted. Snapped. Not out of rage, but out of certainty. It was time. Clara stood motionless behind the door, her fingers tightening around the cleaning rag. This wasn't just corporate talk, these were lives they were laughing about. Parents, breadwinners, people trying to make ends meet. And yet to those two men, they were nothing more than names on a list to cross off. That night, Clara sat at her worn kitchen table, a lukewarm mug of tea beside her and an old notepad in front of her. She didn't know exactly what she was writing, only that staying quiet wasn't an option anymore. She began listing what she'd seen. The corners they cut. The rules they bent. The people they broke. Every injustice she'd tucked away in silence now found its place on the page. By sunrise, she had something more than notes, she had a roadmap. Step 1. Dig deeper. Clara started using her unnoticed presence to her advantage. She memorized patterns, watched routines, and mentally logged details others overlooked. Unlocked laptops, conversations in passing, careless printouts, they all began to form a clearer picture. She wasn't breaking in. She wasn't stealing. She was connecting dots. Step 2. Bring in backup. Clara didn't take this on alone. She reached out to a small circle she trusted, an old friend who practiced law, a cousin who'd made a career decoding financial statements, and a handful of former employees who had walked away from the company bitter but brave. She laid out the facts, asked for their insights, and together they began shaping a plan, not just to reveal the rot within, but to rebuild something better afterward. The final step, though, was the one that kept her up at night. Standing before the CEO and the board wasn't just a matter of proof, it would take nerve, steady hands, and the kind of self-belief she'd spent years being told she didn't deserve. Clara practiced what she'd say over and over, staring at her reflection until her voice no longer shook. This wasn't just for her. It was for every soul who had ever been brushed aside, talked down to, or made to feel invisible. And now, the quiet woman they never noticed was ready to speak. The shareholders' meeting was just days away, and Clara was prepared. She wouldn't be stepping into that room as the woman who emptied trash cans. She'd be stepping in as the one person holding the company's future in her grip. Still, as the day drew closer, a heaviness settled on her chest. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a moment of reckoning. When the day finally arrived, the building buzzed with self-assured energy. Executives breezed through the halls, their voices full of confidence and forecasts of another banner year. No one gave a second glance to the woman rolling a cleaning cart toward the top floor. Clara's expression, as always, gave nothing away. The boardroom stood in stark contrast to the rest of the building, sleek, serene, with a massive polished table stretching across the space and windows that framed the Atlanta skyline like a painting. Seated around the long table were the company's most influential voices, executives who thought they ran the world. At the head sat Victor Langston, posture rigid, smirk cocked like a weapon. He exuded control, convinced of his untouchability. Clara entered as she always did, quiet, unnoticed, setting a pitcher of water on the side table. No one acknowledged her. To them she was just background noise. But today Clara didn't turn to leave. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and clear, slicing through the boardroom's polished calm. Heads turned. Brows furrowed. Victor barely looked up. "We're in the middle of something," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "I'm aware," Clara answered, voice level, unwavering. "That's why I'm here." Victor leaned back, his smile smug. "Unless you're here to tidy up, I suggest you step out." But Clara didn't blink. She moved forward, calm and deliberate, pulled a folder from her cart and set it down on the table. Bold across the front, stamped with the company's crest, "Whitmore Chase, shareholder report." The room froze. Victor's smirk twitched, uncertainty flickering behind his eyes as Clara's voice rang out. "For years," she began, calm but fierce, "I've watched this company rise on the backs of people you've chosen not to see. I've seen good employees belittled, corners cut, ethics thrown out for the sake of numbers. And I said nothing until now." A ripple of whispers stirred around the table. One board member leaned in, eyes narrowing on the folder. "What is this?" Clara opened it slowly. "It's evidence of the corruption, the cover-ups, the way you've turned people into pawns for profit." Victor slammed his hand on the table, voice thundering. "Who do you think you are, barging in here with accusations? You're the janitor." Clara met his glare with a steady fire. "No, Mr. Greaves. I'm the majority shareholder of Whitmore Chase." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle like a stone in water. "And today, I'm terminating your position." The silence cracked like lightning. Shock rippled across the boardroom like a storm no one saw coming. Victor's complexion drained, the swagger he wore so easily slipping from his face. "You're bluffing," he said, voice brittle and unsure. Clara didn't flinch. "No, Mr. Greaves. I'm not." She turned her attention to the board, eyes sharp with purpose. I've spent years collecting everything you tried to ignore. Inflated reports, wrongful terminations, harassment swept under the rug, it's all here. And with my shares, I have the authority to vote him out. So I am. The room broke into shocked murmurs. Victor rose to his feet, shouting over the noise, scrambling to defend himself. But the tide had already turned. The board members flipped through the documents, their faces shifting from confusion to realization. The facts were airtight. Clara had done her work quietly, thoroughly, and without mistake. Within the hour, the vote was called. And just like that, Victor Langston was no longer CEO. His protests were loud, but no one listened. Security was called. And Clara stood in silence, watching him walk out of the building, this time unnoticed. Clara stood tall at the head of the boardroom table, her posture composed, her gaze steady. The same executives who once looked past her now couldn't look away, faces flushed with a mix of disbelief, remorse, and respect. But Clara wasn't here for their validation. Her mind was already focused on the future. By the next morning, the entire company was buzzing. The news of Victor Langston removal had spread like wildfire. Whispers echoed through glass hallways and coffee stations. The janitor? Clara? How could the quiet woman they barely noticed be the one holding the majority stake all along? But this time, the murmurs didn't mock, they marveled. They carried reverence, even regret. Clara didn't soak in the shock or linger in the spotlight. She arrived that day not in her cleaning uniform, but in a sharp blouse, clipboard in hand, vision clear. She hadn't stepped into power just to remove a tyrant. She'd come to rebuild what they'd all forgotten, a company that valued people first. In the weeks that followed, Clara threw herself into rebuilding from the ground up. She began where it mattered most, with the people who had long been forgotten. The cleaning crew, the mailroom staff, the night guards, they were the first to receive long overdue raises. Clara made it clear, dignity starts at the foundation. She demanded HR stop brushing off serious complaints. A third-party oversight team was brought in to make sure every voice mattered and no issue was swept aside. The toxic behaviors that had flourished under Victor's reign were no longer tolerated. And the board? They were no longer untouchable. Clara held them accountable for every blind eye they'd turned. She implemented mandatory training on ethics, inclusion, and mental wellness, not as checkboxes but as culture changers. For the first time in years, people walked into work feeling seen. Still, Clara wasn't done. She hosted town halls, opening the floor to every voice, from interns to senior managers. She sat in those rooms with a notepad, listening like their words built the blueprint. Because to her they did. This wasn't just about policy. It was about rewriting what Whitmore and Chase stood for from the inside out. One afternoon, as Clara made her way through the familiar corridors, a young intern approached her, the same one who had nervously fumbled that cup of coffee months ago outside Victor's office. "Thank you," he said, his voice genuine, eyes steady. "You didn't just clean the place. You transformed it." Clara's face softened. "No," she replied with quiet warmth, "we did this together." Outside, the Atlanta skyline sparkled under the fading sun. Clara stopped and looked up at the towering building, once a place where she was overlooked, her presence barely acknowledged. Now, it stood as a monument to what she had accomplished. This wasn't about titles or revenge. It was a declaration that no one is truly invisible, and even the most ignored voice can echo loud enough to change everything. Clara had shown the world that grit, grace, and quiet strength could outlast even the loudest arrogance. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, a calm she hadn't known in years settling over her. Then she turned, not to disappear, but to step fully into a future she had shaped with her own hands. The world often misjudges those who blend into the background. But Clara's journey proves one thing. Real power isn't always loud, it's patient, watchful, and when the moment is right, unstoppable. If Clara's journey moved you, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that celebrate resilience, justice, and the strength to rise, no matter how invisible the world once made you feel.